Barry is a masterpiece with its story, direction, acting, and more.
Wow.
Everything about the show was amazingly well done, and I was so excited to watch it every time it was on. I kept looking forward to each Sunday. But when I finished the show, I felt like I had lost something great. The ending of the show impacted me more than any recent show has, whether that's Succession, Ted Lasso, The Last of Us, or others. When Barry ended, it felt like I had lost the ability to feel genuinely excited and happy whenever Sunday came around. I felt that I had lost the safety of knowing that the show was waiting for me. And I felt that it wasn't the ending that I wanted. Other shows had great or bittersweet endings, but Barry left me feeling like everything wasn't fair. There was a darkness in this world that was impossible to overlook. These feelings depressed me for days, and I was left heartbroken. But to understand just how impactful the show was for me, let's take it from the top. The first thing I ever saw about Barry was the promotional poster with Bill Hader holding a gun behind a red theater curtain. I had absolutely no idea what to expect. Actually, I take that back. I expected a comedy, because it was Bill Hader. I mean, he was such a great and iconic cast member for SNL that I was sure that this show would be a comedy. But when I started watching, I realized this wasn't a normal comedy. It was a dark comedy. And throughout the show, it gradually became darker until there was no light left.
That's just super fucked up.
From the very beginning, we see a depressed Barry Berkman struggling with his job as a hitman. He's not struggling with doing the job because he's really good at killing. He's struggling with it emotionally. He feels like he's lost purpose in life, and he struggles with the idea that he might be a bad person.
Am I like an evil person?
Oh my God. I mean, absolutely. Do I not tell you that enough?
These feelings that Barry harbors become fuel for the first episode as Barry is hired to kill Ryan Madison, an upcoming actor enrolled in Gene Cousineau's acting school. Barry follows Ryan to the acting class, where Ryan convinces Barry to perform a scene with him. It was at this moment, as Barry is surrounded by a bunch of acting students, that he realizes what he's been missing in his life, what he's struggling with, and what he wants to do now. He wants to become an actor. And this cracked me up.
What the fuck?
I always thought it was hilarious that Barry wanted to become an actor. Throughout the scenes depicting Barry as an actor, he's not particularly good.
What kind of soup?
Chicken noodle?
Consomme.
I don't know. What do you mean you don't know?
I don't know.
Just look at the shelf.
I can't.
Why?
Someone bought it?
No one bought it. That's a lie.
And the class puts him in such ridiculous situations. So why was Barry so happy, so excited, so re-energized with life by becoming an actor? Why did he feel that being an actor would fill him with purpose in a purposeless life? As the show continues, I kept wondering why Barry would have chosen acting as his desired profession out of literally anything else that could provide him with purpose. But as Barry is caught between both his hitman life and his acting life, we begin to learn more about him and this desire he has to be a part of the acting class. Little is known about Barry before the beginning of the show, but throughout its episodes, his backstory as a Marine in Afghanistan set the stage for Barry as a character, because for him, his emotional struggles with being a hitman stem from his time in Afghanistan. During the war, Barry was surrounded by his teammates who both praised him for his killing ability and appreciated him. They loved him for what he was, and he was treated as part of a larger community. Barry felt like he had a home.
Barry? Barry Perfect! Barry.
Everything changed when Barry entered the Korengal Valley, in which one of his friends, Albert, was shot. This caused Barry to lose control of himself as he retaliated, killing an innocent civilian. Rage turned into horror, confusion, and finally regret. We see Barry kill someone and get away with it, as he is discharged shortly after. Barry wasn't this lovable, well-meaning psychopath who was good at killing and loved doing it. He was an unstable, violent man, fueled by aggression and easily able to turn to murder. But that doesn't mean he's a bad person. He's a person who turns to bad outlets for his rage and anger. He displaces his anger with violence. Being discharged forced Barry to leave the war, to leave his home, where he had built a community of peers who showered him with care and praise. Barry was displaced, which is a common occurrence when dealing with war. Displacement, in the context of war, is defined as the forced movement and relocation of individuals or communities from their homes due to armed conflict, violence, or persecution. It involves leaving behind familiar surroundings and being uprooted from one's established community and social networks. This displacement can have two typical forms: internal displacement, when people are forced to flee their homes but seek refuge in other regions and cities within their country, or refugee displacement, when people are compelled to cross international borders to seek safety and protection in another country. But for Barry, his displacement was different. It wasn't a normal form of displacement. It was being discharged and leaving the battlefield. Now, he no longer had the support and appreciation from those around him. Being in Afghanistan provided Barry with a larger sense of purpose. He was part of a community that respected and appreciated him. It was the people that made him feel happier, and leaving made him lose that support net, lose his community of people, and lose his home, because he had nowhere to go to. Nowhere to go other than in the arms of Monroe Fuchs, a man who took advantage of Barry and his killing abilities. This is why Barry wants to be an actor, not for the profession itself, but for the people. As he's pulled onto stage to help Ryan Madison, he hears applause again, the appreciation he had been desperately missing from his time in Afghanistan.
Barry Berkman.
And soon, he falls in love with being in the class. He falls in love with the support from those around him, and feeling like he isn't defined by what he's done in the past. Because when he was with the acting class, he could feel like he was part of a larger community again.
I'm an actor.
So am I.
He wanted a home. And Gene Cousineau's class felt like a home for him, because he felt more seen than he had in a long time. Every person in the acting class was able to connect with Barry in a different way. He was able to develop a relationship with Sally, a woman who easily caught his eye. He was able to rekindle relationships with old friends, such as Chris. And he was able to find a good mentor and father figure in Gene Cousineau, who constantly reinforced that Barry is a good person.
I think you are deeply human.
That he's not defined by the worst thing he's ever done, and that he has a place in this world, and in his class, for a fee. And that's what Barry needs: a feeling of belonging, a feeling of acceptance, a feeling of safety, and a feeling of being at home. And I totally understand this feeling. Growing up, I've always felt like I've never fully fit in, whether it was with my family or my friends. Now that I've grown older, and that I understand how much harder it is to develop a community as an adult, I rooted for Barry. It was so heartwarming to see him being treated well, because I felt that that's what he needed. People do get better in supportive relationships, and I was hoping these relationships would allow Barry to be the best version of himself. But despite all the support and enjoyment Barry gets from the acting class, there are complications with his career as a hitman. As Barry tries to replace Fuchs with Gene Cousineau as his primary father figure, Fuchs begins to have problems with the Chechen mob, with Goran and Noho Hank. These problems force Barry back into murder as he's tackling on more jobs to satisfy both Fuchs and the Chechen mob. And with Barry back to doing more jobs, he quickly becomes entangled in a multitude of problems, which all led to the murder of Detective Janice Moss. The death of Janice Moss was the tipping point in the show, where I realized that there wasn't going to be a happy ending to this story. There wasn't going to be a simple home waiting for Barry on the other side of all this. But I tried to remain optimistic. At least until I watched Fuchs betray Barry and tell Gene Cousineau the truth of Janice's murder. And watching Barry lose control of himself again, killing the soldiers he had trained for the Chechens previously, that we see Barry revert back to who he was in the Korengal Valley, how he reacted when those he cared about were in danger, and how he retaliates to protect what he has. And we see that despite everything that Barry has gone through, how he developed connections with those in the acting class, he's still the same unstable, violent man fueled by aggression and easily able to turn to murder. Because since his displacement, he's harbored trauma from his experiences, whether those experiences were in Afghanistan or from moments as his career as a hitman. As Fuchs pushed him over the edge, Barry experienced the loss of everything he held dear. He lost all respect for Fuchs, he lost the father figure he had with Gene Cousineau, and he lost his feeling of safety. He lost this feeling of being at home, and he desperately wanted to keep it. After season 2, my feelings about Barry became conflicted. I knew that he inherently wasn't a bad person. I knew that Barry's anger was a response to his trauma. Emotions are often a way that the brain tries to process information and protect itself. Anger and rage was just his brain trying its best to protect him in the only way it knows how. And he learned this response from his time in the war. But seeing Barry react in a flurry of rage again saddened me. Watching the murder of all those people at his hands felt like there was no redemption for him, and I desperately wanted him to be able to work past this. As much as you can work past murdering dozens of people. I wanted him to rewire his responses to certain situations and not just turn to murder. I wanted a happy ending, but I just didn't know what a happy ending looked like for the show anymore. It was as if any hope in the show had been murdered along with the rest of Hank's crew. It left me questioning, what was I being optimistic for? Following the season 2 finale, we see Barry live with the emotional guilt and trauma of losing his home once again. He reverts back to his old self as he experiences the resurfacing of his depression, the old emotions he was experiencing at the beginning of the show. And quickly, as season 3 progresses, the show transitions away from a show just about acting, community, and redemption to a show about trauma. Not only for Barry, but for every character in the show. Every character experiences either the resurgence of traumatic feelings or traumatic events that shape who they become for the rest of the show. For example, Sally has a history of abusive relationships. Throughout the show, she grapples with the psychological effects of her past trauma, which influence her behavior and decision-making. In season 3, she becomes the lead actress of her show, Joplin, and during her time working on it, Barry yells at her, attempting to bring Gene Cousineau in the show to gain his forgiveness. This experience with Barry resurfaces her past trauma.
It sent me to a place I never want to go again.
As Hank and Cristobal become a couple, undoubtedly my most favorite couple in the show, we learn that Cristobal is married, with children. He is then kidnapped by his family after his brother-in-law's murder, and is subjected and tortured with electroconversion therapy in an effort to cure his homosexuality. Hank goes on a mission to save Cristobal, but is captured and haunted by the sound of his men being devoured by panthers. He eventually breaks free and saves Cristobal, and both of them leave, traumatized by the events that happened. Gene Cousineau, after realizing Barry was behind the death of Janice Moss, attempts to kill him.
Oh.
Gene is then kidnapped, and he's constantly traumatized as we see Barry repeatedly attempt to earn his forgiveness by getting him jobs in the industry, all while threatening his family's lives if he does not cooperate.
This one and that one. Go away.
And Barry himself, who is haunted by his past actions. As multiple people attempt to get revenge on Barry for killing their loved ones, thanks to the info provided by Fuchs, Barry begins to hallucinate all the people in his past murders. Despite being obsessed with forgiveness from the people around him, primarily Gene Cousineau, he is unable to forgive himself.
When I die, I know where I'm going.
Because for the entire show, Barry has been grappling with the idea that he is a good person, that he isn't defined by his past actions. But as he continues to kill person after person, he loses sight of the good version of himself, the one who could be an actor, and the one who could be safe at home. And when we can't be with the people we love, and we can't be safe, we use whatever we can to get us there. As he attempts to be honest and console Sally after her show is canceled, we see how just unhinged he is as he tells her all the ways to get back at those who canceled her show.
So you break into her house?
Oh, she'd never know I was there. The whole point is to isolate her and make her feel like she's going insane.
The two reconcile as Sally asks Barry's help to get revenge on her former assistant Natalie, who became a showrunner for another show, which caused Sally to lash out and get it caught on film. They are then interrupted by a biker aiming to kill Barry, but Sally kills the biker instead. Sally is traumatized by committing murder and runs away, while Barry buries the body of the biker. But then, he is interrupted by Albert, the one person that Barry saved instead of killed, who confronts him about his murders. Barry breaks down, letting out a shriek resembling a wounded animal. But Albert didn't put this wounded animal out of its misery. He still continued to see the redeeming quality of Barry, that he wasn't evil, that he can be saved, and could continue to save others. What Albert didn't see is that Barry is still haunted by his trauma and is struggling to see right from wrong. And after, he is arrested due to being set up by Gene Cousineau. At this moment, all of my optimism was working double time, and I had no idea how they could end the show. There was no way a happy ending could exist for the show anymore. At this point, the happiest ending could have been just a reconciliation of everyone's trauma. Because the following and final season of the show is the culmination of every character's past traumas and how it has deeply affected them and their actions. It highlights that trauma is not just based on how terrible the experience was, but also how alone you felt during it. Each character is deeply scarred from the events of the previous seasons. At the same time, the show reinforces the idea of redemption, that
Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done.
when Barry is in prison, he is visited by Sally, who tells him,
I feel safe with you.
this was the moment that reignited the flame for Barry, that gave him a hope for the future, a hope for a home that even a person like him could have. Because Sally reminded Barry what it feels like to be loved, not for what he is, but for who he is. Upon escaping during a failed assassination attempt, Barry returns to Sally, and they begin their next chapter together. A new chapter with their son John. When I saw Barry and Sally 8 years later, I got whiplash from just how fast the story advanced. I was stunned to see them living together and trying to live a normal, isolated life. Because we could all see that this life that they had wasn't perfect. And Barry, while researching Abraham Lincoln, learns that good people can have complicated pasts, and there is possibly redemption for him. One of the reasons why I love the show is that I genuinely felt bad for Barry. I wished that he would get out of his life of crime. And as I learned more about him, about his military issues, about the trauma he's kept, I wanted the best for him. I wanted him to get help. I wanted him to be able to work past his traumas. And I wanted him to have a great life. Sure, he's an unstable, violent man fueled by aggression and easily able to turn to murder, but he was also manipulated by those who were supposed to take care of him. He was never given the proper treatment following his tour in Afghanistan. Barry was never the hero of this story, but his lingering trauma and the manipulation from Fuchs accelerated his descent into the villain of this story. And as the show became darker and darker, I was really hoping for a light. I was really hoping that Barry would get help. That Barry would be able to work on his trauma and get the mental health assistance that he desperately needed. Because we always say what a difference it would have made if we had a loving and supportive environment when growing up instead of a neglectful or abusive environment. But we never talk about the importance of having a loving and supportive environment being crucial to the recovery or management of trauma. We need to feel safe and supported by the people we love. We need a community of people who make us feel secure. And when we have those, then we can deal with our past trauma and emotions. Because emotions are just information designed for us to make decisions to keep us safe. They aren't inherently good or bad. Being angry is natural and normal for any person. But going into a blinding rage and murdering people isn't. Barry needed proper mental health treatment for his trauma and the ways that he copes with it. Oftentimes, when we discuss mental health, we look to therapy as the answer, as if talking to a therapist would provide insight, guidance, and a solution to all of our problems. But mental health is beyond just therapy. In clinical work, there's a term called whole person care. In regards to mental health, whole person care refers to the approach that recognizes and addresses the comprehensive needs of an individual's mental well-being. We have this tendency to separate mental and physical health, as if they're not interlinked, and whole person care attempts to remedy that tendency. By adopting a whole person care approach, healthcare providers aim to address the complex and interconnected factors that contribute to an individual's mental well-being. There's never a single factor that defines a person's problems or trauma, but there are interconnected factors that contribute to this trauma. Each person has unique needs, and whole person care aims to provide trauma-informed treatment and support that extend beyond just managing symptoms. Because these symptoms will always have underlying causes, and in order to treat the root of these symptoms, a person needs to be treated with a holistic approach. In order to address the trauma that people face, their basic needs need to be met as well. Similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a person's mental trauma cannot be addressed before addressing their basic needs. People need food, people need water, and people need shelter. And after all these basic needs are met, most importantly, people need to feel connected and supported by people who genuinely love and care for them. They need a home. And this is the reason why Barry has been unable to work through his trauma. Ever since coming back from Afghanistan, he's been moving on from job to job and listening to Fuchs's orders. And when he finally finds a home with the acting class and a father figure with Gene Cousineau, he desperately attempts to keep it. He resorts to murder just to keep his home that he's found. But unfortunately, his home was always under attack. And it's always been a war zone for Barry. Because in addition to needing a home, we all need safety.
I just wanted to be safe. We all do.
In Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, the fundamental stages of recovery are defined as follows. 1. Establishing safety and stabilization. 2. Reconstructing the trauma story. And 3. Restoring the connection between survivors and their community. This first step is the one that I want to focus on, and it is by far the most important step, as nothing else can be done without it. And seeing Barry living with Sally and John was far from being a perfect home, or a home that they needed, because they didn't feel safe. They always felt like someone was watching, that there was always a danger to their home, and they were always jumping at shadows. They were haunted by their pasts. And as Barry returns to LA to attempt to protect his home from Gene Cousineau, potentially working on a movie about his story, he
Oh, wow.
dies? Finishing Barry left me depressed. I was heartbroken on how everything ended. There was no happy ending, and there was no chance for redemption. The heroes became villains, and the villains became monsters. In the final moments of the show, as we see John watch the movie of his father, we see that it gets the story all wrong. And getting it wrong was a common theme for the show. Just like how they get it wrong that Gene was responsible for Janice's murder, just like how multiple assassinations go wrong, and just like how the police get it wrong with their investigations. And I desperately wanted them to get it right. I wanted a happy ending. I know that there was no possible way that could happen, but I genuinely wanted it to happen. Because we all deserve a home. We all deserve safety, and we all deserve a chance to work through our trauma. Watching Hank die in the arms of Cristobal's statue, watching Fuchs return John to Barry and disappearing from existence, watching Gene Cousineau get blamed for Janice's murder and serving life in prison, watching Sally work as an acting teacher after all that's happened to her, and watching John watch the fabricated story of his father, each one of these characters deserved the chance to get better, to get things right. And unfortunately, they couldn't, and their story has ended. But because the show must go on, there is a chance for us to get something right, whether that's working on remedying displacement or addressing trauma through a whole person care approach, or even being able to provide others with a sense of safety, belonging, and community, because everyone deserves that. Barry was a show about many things. It was a show that started with a light that faded into darkness with each passing episode. It was a show that never glorified violence, but displayed it as a matter of fact, ugly, brutal, and traumatic. And it was also a show about how everyone can make bad mistakes. But Barry doesn't have to be a show about the darkness, the violence, or the mistakes. It can be a show that emphasizes the importance of addressing trauma, the importance of having safety, and the importance of having a home. Everyone deserves that chance to have a home. We all need to feel like we're safe, that we are accepted for who we are. Throughout life, there's people that like how you make them feel, there's people that like what you can do for them, and there's people that genuinely love you for who you are. And finding the people who genuinely love you is such an important aspect. It can help you begin to work through your trauma, and it can help remind you that you are not defined by the worst thing you've ever done.